In the 1993 AFC Wild Card game, the Houston Oilers led the Buffalo Bills by 32 points. But on the back of future Hall of Famer Andre Reed and Frank Reich, Buffalo came back and won 41-38 in overtime. It was the only comeback in NFL history by more than 28 points until Saturday, December 17th, 2022. The Indianapolis Colts, led by interim head coach Jeff Saturday, after the Colts coincidentally fired Frank Reich, led the Minnesota Vikings 33-0 at the half. Somehow, someway, the Vikings came back and won 39-36 in overtime. The Indianapolis Colts absolutely blasted the Minnesota Vikings in the first half. The Colts had the ball to start the game and had a pretty lengthy 6-minute drive that was capped off by a 26-yard Chase McLaughlin field goal to make it 3-0. Minnesota went nowhere on its first drive and ended up going 3 and out and brought out the punt unit. But it was blocked, and the Colts took it back 24 yards for a touchdown to make it 10-0. Things just kept getting worse from there for Minnesota. The Vikings picked up a huge first down on their first play of the next drive that got the ball into Indianapolis territory, but Dalvin Cook fumbled on the next play. The Colts took advantage of the turnover and drove down before a 1-yard Deion Jackson touchdown catch that extended the lead to 17. The Vikings didn't get much going on their next drive before a huge 4th and 1 on their own 31. Minnesota made the very bold decision to go for it, and Cook was stopped, giving the ball back to the Colts, who took advantage of field position again with a 28-yard field goal to make it 20-0. After another 3 and out, the Vikings attempted a fake punt, but it ended up being incomplete, giving the Colts the ball at the Minnesota 31-yard line. Now, the Colts didn't gain a single yard, but they did end up drilling a 49-yard field goal from the spot to go up 23-0. The Vikings got the ball back and, shocker, went 3 and out. But finally, Minnesota stopped the Colts on the ensuing drive. It gave at least a sliver of momentum to the Vikings. That was until Kirk Cousins threw a pick 6 the next drive that Julian Blackmon took back 17 yards to the house that put the Colts up 30-0. Minnesota punted again, and Indianapolis drove down, and McLaughlin drilled a 27-yarder. The Vikings, with only 3 seconds left, knelt to concede a 33-0 deficit into the half as boos rained from the crowd. What do you even tell a team that's down 33-0 at halftime? Patrick Peterson seemed to have a few ideas. He had a very simple message to the offense. The defense was going to get their stops, and he told the offense that they needed to score just 5 touchdowns. And that's exactly what the Vikings ended up doing. It didn't happen immediately though. The Vikings had the ball to start the half and ended up going 3 and out again, losing 8 total yards on the drive. But the Minnesota defense responded with a stop despite the Colts getting into enemy territory. The Vikings got the ball back, and KJ Osborne took over in what was a career day for him. Osborne had a 63-yard catch and then caught a 2-yard touchdown pass a couple of plays later to cut it to 33-7. Indianapolis responded with a long 52-yard Chase McLaughlin field goal that made it 36-7 with less than 5 minutes remaining in the third quarter. But the Vikings were nearly perfect from there. The next drive, Minnesota drove down and punched it in with a 1-yard CJ Ham touchdown. And just like Patrick Peterson said they would, the Vikings defense started getting stops. Minnesota forced a punt, and Justin Jefferson just took over. He had catches for 20 and 17 yards before an 8-yard touchdown to bring the Vikings within 15. Minnesota got another stop. All of a sudden, Minnesota had all the momentum until a horrible Jalen Reagor play. He ran a deep route, and for whatever reason, he just stopped. Cousins tried to go to him, but it was intercepted by Rodney Thomas. That easily could have ended it for Minnesota, but the Vikings got another stop, and Kirk Cousins found Adam Thielen, finally for his first catch of the game, a 19-yard gain, and then found him for a 1-yard touchdown, making the score 36-28 with 5 minutes remaining. The Colts ran some clock, but Deion Jackson ended up fumbling. At that point, Minnesota had all the momentum, but credit to the Colts, they made a huge stop and stonewalled the Vikings on a big 4th and 15. Indianapolis then followed it up on the ensuing drive by being stopped short on a 4th and 1. Minnesota got the ball back with just over 2 minutes left. On the very next play, Cousins hit Cook on a screen and he took it 64 yards to the house. Cousins found TJ Hawkinson for the 2-point conversion, and shockingly, after trailing 33-0, the Vikings tied it. The Minnesota Vikings somehow tied the Indianapolis Colts at 36 after trailing 33-0 at half, but still had to complete the victory. Minnesota did force a 3-and-out and had the chance to win it in regulation, but were stopped 1 yard short on 3rd down and ended up punting. The Colts ended up kneeling, and it went to overtime. Minnesota ended up winning the ever so important coin toss and elected to receive, but they didn't actually end up punching it in. The Vikings got the ball down to the Indianapolis 39 and opted not to take the long field goal and just punted. The Colts ultimately punted too, and the Vikings started at their own 18-yard line. Minnesota had a few chunk plays, KJ Osborne for 15 yards and Adam Thielen for 21, before a huge 13-yard Justin Jefferson catch. After the reception, the Colts definitely tried to hold up Jefferson and let time run out, but it was pretty obvious that it was a delay of game and a penalty came out to set up a 40-yard field goal that Greg Joseph drilled to complete the largest comeback in NFL history. The Minnesota Vikings came into Week 15 10-3, and they hosted the 4-8-1 Indianapolis Colts. That's a game you'd obviously expect the Vikings to win, and most did, but it was shocking how the Colts just absolutely dominated the first half of the game to jump out to a 33-0 lead at the half. It was even more shocking that the Vikings somehow won that game. Minnesota didn't put up great stats in the first half, but it ended up being a solid day. First and foremost, hat tip to KJ Osborne. He had a career day and was a massive reason for the Vikings' comeback. Osborne finished the day with 157 yards and a touchdown. Justin Jefferson had 123 yards and a touchdown, and Dalvin Cook had 95 yards and a touchdown through the air, in addition to 95 yards on the ground. Kirk Cousins finished 34 of 54 for 460 yards with 4 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Michael Pittman did the heavy lifting in the passing game for the Colts, as per usual. He was the only pass catcher with more than 2 receptions, and he had 10 for 60 yards. After an early injury to Jonathan Taylor, Zach Moss rushed for 81 yards, and Deion Jackson had 55. Matt Ryan went 19 of 33 for 182 yards and a touchdown. You gotta absolutely feel for Matt Ryan. Everyone knows the biggest Super Bowl comeback of all time, 28-3. In 2017, the Atlanta Falcons jumped out to a 28-3 lead over the New England Patriots. It looked as if it were over, but it wasn't. New England roared back and forced overtime before a James White rushing touchdown won the Super Bowl for the Patriots. Matt Ryan was on the wrong side of the biggest Super Bowl comeback of all time. And now, he's been on the wrong side of the biggest comeback of all time. That's just a horrible way to be remembered, but it's just the reality. He was amazing in 2016 and even won MVP, but those are the two things that are likely going to stick with him forever. He struggled to close out games offensively, but to be fair, it's not his fault his defenses have folded late. It's been a rough year for Matt Ryan. He was traded from the Atlanta Falcons to the Indianapolis Colts and has not only been bad, but benched at one point. It feels like his entire career began to fall apart after the Falcons' 28-3 blown Super Bowl lead. And on Sunday, in what could realistically be some of his last handful of games as a starting quarterback in the league, his team blew the largest lead in NFL history, 33 points.